Caleb Ward had lived alone for so long that even the sound of his own voice sometimes surprised him. For 8 years he woke up to the same quiet morning, made the same coffee, saddled the same old horse, and walked the same land he had cared for since his youth. The hills around his ranch were wide and empty, stretching toward the horizon with no other homes in sight. Some people said the land looked lonely, but Caleb always said it simply matched the life he lived: quiet, simple, and without trouble. He had once dreamed of a large family and a lively home, but life had taken a different path, leaving him with only work, memories, and open skies. Most days, Caleb did not mind it. He believed it was easier this way. People brought questions, noise, and emotional weight he no longer had the strength to carry. His cattle did not ask anything from him except food and shelter. His horses accepted him without judgment. The land never betrayed him. And silence, became the only companion he could trust fully. The winter season had always been a difficult time on the ranch. Strong winds swept down from the mountains and froze everything they touched. Fences broke easily, cattle grew restless, and Caleb had to work twice as hard to keep everyone, animals, and himself safe. But he was used to it. He had done it alone for many years, and he believed he could continue doing it for the rest of his life. On one bitterly cold night, when the sky was dark and heavy with clouds, Caleb closed the barn door and hurried back to his cabin. Snowflakes hit his face hard, and the wind whistled through the trees like a warning. He had seen storms before, but this one had come suddenly, faster than any he remembered. By the time he stepped inside his cabin, his hands were numb, and his coat was covered in frost. He lit a fire in the stone fireplace and warmed his hands slowly. The crackling flames were the only sound in the room. Outside, the storm grew louder. The wind pushed against the cabin walls, making them creak softly. Caleb sat in his old wooden chair, ready for another silent night. He reached for a book, more out of habit than interest. Most nights he read only a page or two before sleep came. But before he could open the book, a sound broke through the storm. A knock. Soft, uncertain, almost lost in the howling wind. Caleb froze. A knock. Here? In all his years living alone, no one had ever come to his cabin during a winter storm. He listened carefully. Maybe he imagined it. Maybe it was something hitting the door. But then it came again, slightly louder, but still gentle. A real knock. Someone was outside. He slowly put his book aside and stood up. His heart beat a little faster. Not with fear, but with confusion. Who would be out in the middle of nowhere, this late at night, during such terrible weather? He walked to the door, unsure what he would find, and pulled it open. Standing in the snow was a woman, an Apache woman, wrapped in a thin blanket that barely protected her from the cold. Her long dark hair was wet from snow, her cheeks pale from the freezing wind, and her arms trembled as she held the blanket tightly around her. Her eyes, though tired and desperate, stayed steady on him. "Please," she whispered through chattering teeth. "I need warmth." Caleb stared at her for a moment, surprised, uncertain how to react. He had not spoken to a stranger in a long time, and certainly not one who appeared in such a helpless state. She looked like she had been walking for many hours, maybe even days. Snow clung to her clothes, as if the storm itself had chased her. "What happened?" he asked carefully. "I lost my group," she said, taking a shaky breath. "The storm came fast. I kept walking, but I could not find shelter. Then, from far away, I saw your firelight." Caleb realized then how desperate she must have been to reach his cabin. A light in the storm gave hope, even if the path to it was dangerous. She lowered her eyes as if ashamed of asking. "I only need warmth for the night. I will not trouble you for anything else." Caleb hesitated for a second. Not because he wanted to refuse her, He couldn't imagine turning someone away in such weather. But because the situation was so new, so sudden, that it took him a moment to understand it was real. Then, he stepped aside and opened the door wider. "Come in," he said quietly. The woman entered slowly, almost collapsing with relief as the warm air touched her skin. Caleb closed the door behind her and guided her toward the fire. She crouched beside it immediately, holding her hands toward the flames. A soft, grateful sigh escaped her lips as the heat began to return to her body. Caleb fetched a warm coat from his room and placed it around her shoulders. She looked up at him, surprised by the kindness. "Thank you," she said softly. He nodded and sat down a short distance away to give her space. The cabin filled with silence again. But it felt different now. No longer empty, but cautious, curious. After a few minutes, she spoke again. "My name is Naira." "Caleb," he replied. She tried to smile, but her exhaustion made it small. "You saved me tonight." "I just gave you warmth," Caleb said, trying not to make it sound like much. Anyone would. But Naira shook her head slowly. "Not everyone lights a fire this late. If you hadn't, I might not have seen your cabin." Her words made Caleb's heart tighten a bit. He wasn't used to being thanked, or seen, or needed. For 8 years, he had simply existed, doing his work without expecting anyone to come into his life. Yet here she was a stranger pulled to him by nothing but a small flicker of fire. As she warmed her hands, Caleb noticed how strong she looked despite her exhaustion. Her face carried calm determination. She was used to surviving harsh lands, used to hardship. But tonight, even strong people needed help. They spoke only a little at first. Naira explained she had been traveling with her small family to find safer land. They had separated to gather supplies before the storm hit. She had taken the wrong path and ended up alone, fighting the cold. Caleb told her about his life on the ranch, the quiet routine he followed since losing those dear to him. His voice remained calm, but Naira sensed the hidden sadness behind his words. The firelight made the cabin warm and soft. Snow beat against the windows. But inside, the silence between them slowly softened. Two strangers who had lived their own hardships now sat close to the same fire, each feeling something shift inside them. The hours passed quietly. Naira's shivering stopped, and color returned to her cheeks. Caleb added more logs to the fire and handed her a cup of warm tea. She accepted it with both hands, holding it carefully as if afraid to drop something so precious. Caleb watched her with a gentle curiosity. He had not shared his home with anyone in years. The presence of another person, someone real, someone who needed warmth, someone who looked at him with grateful eyes, felt unusual, but strangely comforting. When the storm grew louder outside, Naira leaned back slightly, feeling safe for the first time in many days. Caleb noticed her eyelids drooping from exhaustion. "You can rest," he said softly. "You're safe here." She nodded, almost too tired to speak. Her eyes closed slowly as the fire warmed her body. Caleb stayed awake a little longer, watching the flames, listening to the storm, and thinking about how quickly a quiet life could change. For 8 long years, no one had knocked on his door. And yet tonight, a woman desperate for warmth had found her way to him, turning his lonely cabin into a place where 2 lives gently crossed. And as Caleb finally lay down to rest, he felt something he had not felt in a very long time. The cabin didn't feel empty anymore. The storm had softened by the time sunlight touched the hills, painting them in a pale golden color. Caleb woke to the sound of the fire still burning softly in the fireplace. For a moment, he forgot the events of the night before. He had lived alone for so many years that another person inside his cabin felt like something from a dream. But when he sat up, he saw the warm coat placed neatly on a chair and remembered everything. Naira was still asleep near the hearth, wrapped in one of his blankets. Her breathing was calm now, steady and peaceful. The fear and exhaustion she carried last night were gone from her face. Caleb watched her quietly for a few moments, noticing how the glow of morning made her look even calmer. He realized she must not have had a safe night of rest in a long time. For her to sleep so deeply meant she trusted the shelter he offered. Caleb didn't want to disturb her, so he stepped outside quietly to check on the ranch. The snow had piled up against the fences, and the air carried a sharp, cold bite. He moved slowly, cleaning pathways, checking on the animals, and breaking the ice in the water trough. It was his routine. But today, it felt different. Today there was someone waiting inside the cabin. Someone who would wake up and see him return. It had been years since he felt that small sense of responsibility toward another person. When he returned to the cabin, he found Naira awake and standing near the table. She looked a little unsure, as if wondering whether she had overstayed her welcome, but when she saw Caleb, her expression softened. "I made something," she said gently. On the table were warm biscuits she had baked, using the simple ingredients he kept in the kitchen. The smell filled the cabin in a way it hadn't in many years. Caleb blinked in surprise. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I wanted to," she replied. There was sincerity in her voice, a gentle warmth that matched the morning light. Caleb sat down, and she joined him after a moment. They ate in peaceful silence at first. The biscuits were simple but comforting, much better than the plain meals Caleb often cooked for himself. Sharing a meal with someone else after so long felt strange, yet pleasant. After breakfast, Caleb offered to show her the safest paths for travel. She needed to rejoin her family, and he wanted to make sure she left the hills without trouble. But before he could explain the route, Naira asked if they could walk around his ranch for a while. "I want to understand how you live," she said softly. "This place, it feels peaceful." Caleb hesitated, then agreed. He grabbed his coat, and they stepped outside. The sun was rising higher now, melting some of the thin snow that covered the grass. The hills looked brighter, and the cold air felt less harsh than the night before. They walked slowly across the ranch. Caleb showed her the barn, the fields, the creek that ran behind the cabin, and the stretch of land he used for grazing cattle. Naira listened carefully, observing everything with thoughtful eyes. She admired how calm and steady the place felt. "You live very far from people," she said after a while. "I do," Caleb replied. "It's quiet. That's how I want it." Naira stopped walking and looked at him with gentle curiosity. "But do you want silence, or did life push you into it?" Her question caught him by surprise. Caleb didn't answer right away. He looked at the ground, then toward the distant hills. His voice was low when he finally spoke. "Maybe both," he said. "After losing what mattered, it felt easier not to let anything else close." Naira nodded slowly. She didn't push him for more. She simply respected the weight behind his words. Caleb appreciated that. Most people would have asked questions or tried to change the subject. Naira understood that some things were carried quietly, without explanation. They continued walking. At the creek, the sunlight reflected off the water, creating bright little sparkles. Naira knelt down and touched the surface gently. Caleb watched her, noticing the calm strength she carried. She was not fragile. Even though last night she had looked vulnerable, she was a survivor, someone who faced hardship with dignity. As they stood near the water, Naira spoke again. "Last night, when I saw your fire from far away, it gave me hope. I had been walking for hours, with no shelter, no sign of direction. I thought I might not survive the storm. But then your cabin light appeared. It felt like a sign." Caleb listened quietly. "I did not only beg for warmth because of the cold," she continued. "I begged because I believed the person inside would help me." Her honesty touched him. It wasn't often someone spoke to him with such open sincerity. "You trusted a stranger?" he asked. softly. "I trusted the fire you kept," she replied. "Fire tells a lot about a person." Caleb thought about that. He had always lit his fire out of habit, never imagining it could reach someone in need. Yet somehow, his small routine had guided her through a dangerous night. As they walked back toward the cabin, Caleb found himself stealing small glances at her. He had grown used to silence, but walking beside her felt strangely natural. The cold didn't bite as sharply, and the land didn't feel as empty. When they reached the porch, Naira took a quiet breath. "I should continue my journey," she said. "My family will be waiting. They will worry." Caleb knew this moment would come, yet it still placed a heavy feeling inside his chest. He didn't want to keep her from her family, but he wasn't ready to return to complete loneliness either. Still, he nodded. "I'll help you prepare," he said. He gathered warm clothes, food, and water for her. She accepted them with deep gratitude. Before she stepped off the porch, she turned back toward him. "You have a kind heart, Caleb," she said softly. "You hide it behind silence, but it is there." Her words made something shift inside him, something gentle, yet powerful. He wasn't used to anyone seeing past his quiet exterior. Naira stepped off the porch and began walking down the path. Caleb followed her for a short distance, guiding her to a safe trail that would lead her out of the hills. The air grew quiet between them again, but not the uncomfortable type. It was a quiet, filled with unspoken understanding. When they reached the edge of his land, Naira paused. She held the blanket closer to her shoulders and looked at him one last time. "If our paths cross again," she said in a soft voice, "it will not be by accident." Those words lingered in the cold morning air. Caleb felt them settle deep inside him. Naira gave him a final grateful look, then turned and continued her journey, her steps steady and determined. Caleb stood there, watching her until she disappeared behind the hills. Even after she was gone, he remained still, letting the silence return around him. But it wasn't the same silence he had known for 8 long years. It felt warmer somehow, as if her presence had filled something empty inside him. When he finally walked back to his cabin, he noticed something simple but meaningful. The fire he had lit the night before was still burning. He added another log to keep it alive. He didn't know if Naira would ever return, or if fate would take their paths in different directions forever. But for the first time in many years, Caleb felt a new sense of purpose. He kept the fire burning not for himself, but for the possibility, the small hope, that one day she might see it again. And in that quiet cabin on the lonely hills, a man who had lived in silence for 8 years finally felt his heart warming again, all because an Apache woman came begging for warmth on a cold winter night.